I'm really happy to have some of my friends come here and talk to you about the investing side of things, especially at a time where it seems like with every announcement, hundreds of startups seem to be obsolete. So investing is hard. I mean, no one's crying for the VCs, but I brought together, every single one of these VCs I respect quite a bit. They all have different strengths. We have people that are in growth, like Ethan, who just started a new fund, recently left Khosla, to all the way to the -1 stage with Meeks here in South Park Commons. All of these folks also invest in AI. It's actually hard to find a VC who doesn't invest in AI, to be fair. But as you can tell with Tomasz's talk, all of these investors I respect for their thoughtfulness on this new wave that we're all trying to figure out. So just to kick things off, I'm going to ask each one of you to do a quick introduction, what fund you represent, and the stages that you invest in. Last, please answer this question. What has changed in the last 6 months? What belief did you hold 6 months ago about AI that has changed today? And so Finn, will you kick us off?
You want me to address both in one? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm Finn, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm one of the general partners over at South Park Commons. We're a community of founders, researchers, technologists who are exploring at the -1 to 0 stage, figuring out what they want to pursue next. We are backed by a venture fund that I help support that invests in these companies from the earliest stages. What is a belief that I have changed my mind about in the last 6 months? I think that I've spent a lot of time just kind of diving in and building myself over the last 6 months. And I think that the amount of progress that has been made over the last 6 months feels like the amount of progress that was made over kind of the last 3 years combined. It really has accelerated. And I think the impact of that is I just believe that agents are going to be the primary users of software in the future, even more so than humans. This aligns with some of the stuff that Tomasz was talking about in his presentation before this. And I think it gets into kind of the new infrastructure stack as well. So I'm excited to discuss that more.
Awesome. Thank you. Ethan?
Hey everyone, Ethan Kurzweil. I'm one of the founders of Chemistry. Chemistry is a new firm launched 2 years ago. We do seed and Series A investing, and check size is up to 30 million. In terms of, and before that, I spent 16 years at Bessemer Venture Partners investing in developer tooling, infrastructure software, and various AI applications as well. My belief in AI is that that's changed in the last 6 months is that AI will render us obsolete before I retire.
Whoa.
My name's Tomasz Tunguz. I program with local models at Theory Ventures. We're a firm that's about 3 years old. We're investing out of our second fund, and I give a talk on what I think has changed, which is I really believe in the power of local.
Hey guys, my name's Ethan Choi. Most recently at Khosla, prior to there at Excel. Just recently spun out to finally be a founder on my own and start my own thing. By the way, can I just apologize on behalf of all VCs now that I'm a founder? I've actually picked up the phone and called all my founders and said, if I was ever one of those annoying VCs who asked you, did you think about this? Did you think about this? I'm really sorry. So it's so hard. So thank you for all you're doing, you founders out there. That's probably the biggest thing that's changed for me is just how raw the founding experience is. And I've been doing this for 14 years. And you think you're on this side of the table and you think you know what that looks like and feels like. And Ethan and Tomasz is nodding their heads. You just don't until you do it. So I so much respect for founders. So thank you.
Hey everyone, I'm Aditya. I'm a partner at Kleiner Perkins. I invest across the stack of enterprise AI. I would say that infrastructure investing didn't really have much legs until very recently. And so one of the things I've changed my mind about is actually there is a lot of really interesting opportunities at the infrastructure layer that power agents, that make AI reliable in the enterprise. And I think a lot of big companies will be built here.
Yeah, and let's start with that question actually. So I think there's a common, between founders and VCs, there's this common maybe despair right now that nothing is worth investing in or building because it will be made obsolete by the research labs. And so I guess from the investor perspective, There are two questions here. What do you find investable, and how do you identify the attributes that make it investable? And then two, relatedly, where does value ultimately accrue in this kind of new world of abundance? There's been debates back and forth. It's the application layer, it's something to do with verticals, or it's core infrastructure. So, anyone's game.
Sure. I could jump in because I no longer believe. Maybe I should have answered this question before. That it's ideas are impervious to disruption because of just how quickly AI models move and how quickly they get squashed by new things. So I don't think it's a category by category analysis anymore of this particular thing is not disruptible and there's moats here. Maybe there's little network effects in certain areas that make it harder, but what I now believe is that in each particular idea, there is a way to make it sustainable, and it's incumbent on the team to figure out what that is. There is always an answer. It may not be obvious. It may be hard. It may require 6 pivots. It may, I don't know. But in every particular area, there's some way to keep the software sticky, whether it's some harnessing tech or some workflow or, I don't know, research that's on the frontier, and makes it challenging to figure out what that is.
Keep borrowing Tomasz's. It's funny. I think we're just getting started with models, is where I'm at. Like a lot of people say 1 trillion absolute valuation. That's crazy. And I think we're going to look back in 5 to 10 years and realize the models are going to be 10, $50 trillion companies. That's my take. They're hitting a point of recursive intelligence and self-learning that's getting to a point of scary, but it doesn't mean that there aren't pockets for other folks to build value. I mean, I think it sounds like Finn is of a similar perspective, which is there's going to be all these roads and bridges and infrastructure that's different. I think when I first joined Khosla, for the first 5 months, I went down to the chips and worked my way back up to the application layer and just thought through all the things that would change in databases, cybersecurity, permissioning, authorization, and invested accordingly into things like ClickHouse, Glean and so forth. And so I do think there is a new stack that has to be built because many of the SaaS era, infrastructure is not ready for the concurrency, volume, speed, and the cost at which we have to process data. And what the agents, when you have a bajillion agents who all need to be logged, traced, and their metrics stored and analyzed, it's just a new world of data explosion we have not really completely comprehended.
I'm happy to give a couple of framings that I lean on in this era. So maybe let's start with, where does AI have product market fit? I mean, the most intense product market fit is in coding. So then you work backwards and you say, okay, what are the choke points? The choke points are all the infra primitives that power the SDLC. And that's going to have to fundamentally change. And we can talk about what those are, but I think there'll be a valuable set of infra companies that unbundle GitHub or even rethink GitHub from the ground up. So, that's totally like greenfield right now, and we're starting to see some talented entrepreneurs go after that. I'd say the second is also infra to make agents reliable in the enterprise. Governance, authentication, durable execution, evals, like inference. I think all of these are fair game, and you have to pick your spots in a smart way. But if you do, again, huge opportunities. And then just in the app layer, the two things I'll say is, I think voice is emerging as a standalone pillar that is going to be kind of adjacent to what the labs focus on for one reason or the other. And so if you're an opinionated voice app, I think you have a really good shot at building something interesting. And even at the app layer, I think today you have to pick a domain where you're operating on data that is hard to acquire for the labs, either through some kind of acquisition or through an RL environment. And if you do, and if the data is complex enough, there's value to be built in conjunction with the models that makes you sticky. So that's what I lean on when I look at startups today.
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in with one. I think there's two ways to kind of interpret this question too. I think there are the set of things that maybe are kind of in the eye of Sauron of the big labs, and then there are things that maybe are just kind of in the path of AI, maybe as kind of a whole. I think in terms of what is maybe not in the path of just the big labs, I think that it kind of comes back to Ethan's answer. I think that there is there are quite a few kind of like sectors or areas where there's a really hard problem to be solved that just doesn't that it doesn't solely rely on just the model or the things you can build around the model. I'll give you kind of two examples. One, I think there are a lot of companies that are building things that actually touch the physical world nowadays that leverage some improvements in models, but also require building in kind of the world of atoms, building hardware or integrating with hardware. That's not an easy problem for just the model to kind of solve in and of itself, but actually toes on kind of or drafts on a lot of the improvements in both LLMs and VLMs and VLAs. A second one is that I think that there are a lot of companies that I work with that are finding out ways to use LLMs to accelerate some workflow that actually allows them to build a kind of a more guarded asset. An example of this is I work with a company in the healthcare space that builds software to help clinicians and providers accelerate a bunch of their own workflows. But as those providers onboard to their software, they actually bundle them into a provider network that they can then go and use to negotiate on behalf of a bunch of those providers. The provider network is a very valuable asset that they kind of own, that they've unlocked from a go-to-market perspective with AI, but is not necessarily in the direct line of the models themselves. So I think that maybe those are a couple of examples of specific moats that you can kind of carve out. But I think a bunch of these industries have some. You just have to go and find it.
One other way to crack it is like one of the most powerful features of stickiness in software is network effects, which is really hard. Like think GitHub, even though nobody likes it, like everybody's still using it. And so there's not many places where you can have network effects in software. In AI, there's the potential of that. Data feeds into a system that makes it better and better and becomes self-improving is kind of one possible thing, but probably not enough. So it's how can you get to a place where as more and more users or more and more situations that a software can be deployed in, it gets better and better, that the whole system improves. And there's not a whole lot of things like that, but it kind of in every market that I believe there is a path to that.
One of the most common questions we got from our audience was how to operate in an AI native way. I think about this kind of maybe just in terms of like metrics and ratios. We used to talk about like SDR to AE or coverage. It seems like a lot of those old benchmarks in the SaaS world are no longer as relevant. So what advice do you have, or what have you seen in your portfolios of founders that are operating in a really order of magnitude better way with AI than previously was possible?
I think the most concrete instantiation of it is the software factory. That's where we see it today. And a software factory is literally where somebody puts in a spec for a product and then 10 minutes later it pops out and it works. And initially we saw that within our companies where the headcount, the revenue of a company might 10x or 20x and the R&D headcount was flat. Now we're starting to see R&D headcount increase again. And people are trying to create other kinds of factories, but none of those problems are as closed loop as coding is.
Yeah, I'm interested in the non-coding use cases. Anyway, the detail.
Well, I was going to pile on to just add some color to what Tomasz said, which is one of the new changes is that every non-technical or semi-technical worker is getting access to Claude Code and Cursor. So even in our companies, like the non-technical folks are forced to close the loop themselves and prototype. And I think the engineering teams are creating the guardrails for that. But we're seeing salespeople and marketing people prototype real things, and I think they're able to just move a lot faster in a way that just wasn't possible.
I think in the, for the software factory, I think, I've seen some teams that are kind of going beyond just kind of writing code as well, right? I work with a team that is just kind of constantly looking at everything that they spend their human minutes on and wondering if an agent should be doing it for them, and then building, kind of a meta agent that goes and builds the agent to go and automate kind of that work. So it's actually constantly observing everything that they do, tracking where they're spending their time, and then figuring out ways to go and kind of automate that time with maybe a more purpose-built agent. So, they have an agent that is, actually creating the spec for them by understanding the data they're getting out of, their customer calls, and maybe we'll just be running their customer calls one day. Data that is ingesting tickets and automatically kind of resolving them. and they have, millions of dollars of revenue per employee, which would not otherwise be possible in a traditional sense. But they've just created a very leveraged version of themselves in these agents.
I think that's coding to your question, Simon. The biggest areas I have seen it is on the product function, and there was really an inflammatory tweet that said there's no need for CPOs. I don't think that's the case, but we are seeing that like the product function can do a whole lot more, right? And can be, to Aditya's point, get to the bare metal and to the end result faster and quicker, and give the developers more time to work on some other things. The go-to-market side across my more mature companies, that has certainly changed. And part of the thing that, whether we're at a board meeting, is actually trying to force constraints onto the teams whereby they themselves are forced to use AI to make themselves a lot more efficient. So for example, like SDRs used to lean on marketing for content, bespoke marketing content for end customers. For a lot of my companies now, it's like there's no marketing help. Like every SDR on their own uses AI. And so we're seeing all those ratios change. One of my best companies, the CEO deliberately underhired his plan for many, many quarters and just watched as we were complaining, hey, go hire more reps. And by the end of the week, he came out and said, look, my reps are more productive than any other rep. And those constraints for 2 or 3 quarters is what I needed to put in place for those people to finally adopt AI. So that's the main thing.
That's awesome. Yeah. Let me just remind you guys that we're going to do a Q&A, so just think of questions that you might want to ask these guys. So this is a question that we talked about in our first panel of founders, and it's the question of managing your infra costs. And this is most relevant to our founders in the audience that are building agents that are customer facing or any solution that relies on inference. And I'm sure Tomasz has a take here, but what have you seen in your portfolios and otherwise for strategies in managing your infrastructure cost? How does that impact how you think about pricing and packaging? And what can startup founders do to get ahead of any potential problems they might have when they start to scale?
Happy to kick it off. So, we're certainly moving to this world where it's going to be hybrid. It's going to be a mix of open source and closed source models. And, I think if you're an early stage startup founder, as long as you have enough capital, maybe you don't want to optimize for this too soon, but soon enough, you're going to want to figure out how to do smart routing. And, that's an emerging trend. You don't need to always invoke the best model for every task. I think, thinking through that carefully, especially the middleware of the stack, will be important. And then, there are new inference platforms that, and Tomasz and I like one in particular that are now being purpose-built for long-running agents and how to make them, run more efficiently. And so you're going to see more infrastructure as well that's built and that'll be available to you all that will be more focused on, throughput and much lower cost. And I would just say keep your eyes and ears open. And the last thing I'll say is, the companies that are hitting scale, you may have heard this already, but they're certainly trying to post-train, open source models on their own data. And we're starting to see examples of this where that, the performance of those models tends to match the frontier models at scale. So, once you hit a certain limit, that's probably the way to go.
I mean, not to change the question on you, but we're in a market right now that's valuing growth and product footprint more than anything else, and not how capital efficient it is to have that growth. And so certainly, like, everyone's kind of been saying there'll be this like reckoning moment for AI where we're using a blowtorch to light a little whatever, like a tiny stick of paper on fire when all we need is a match. But yet there's not a lot. I mean, the answer is I have no idea to your question, because there's not a lot of talk at the foundational level of like, how do we make sure we're not overusing the models? We're routing smartly and appropriately. Because if you can get a little bit of edge of growth, if you can, your product velocity is a little better, assuming you can fund it, that's where the energy at the frontier is going right now. I think the question is kind of like, when does that change writ large? When do enterprises start to sort of rationalize AI spend more? When do startups look at gross margin more carefully? I don't know, but it feels like we're in this sort of era where I think what will happen is once we sort of hit the limits of how fast some of the models can scale at the frontier, which we're starting to sort of see now. Can Anthropic get to 100 billion in revenue by the end of the year? Or are they going to be capped on inference? Like, are they not going to literally have enough computational capacity to do it? Then I think we get to a world where some of these techniques matter a lot more.
I think it's important to cut AI inference spend into two buckets. There's R&D spend. And there, I think for startups, spend is unlimited because it's not going to matter. We're willing to give the startups as much money as they need, and let's go big. Just to Ethan's point. And then and then there's a question of, okay, now I'm selling inference to a customer, and how much am I willing to mark up that inference? Because it's really important if you want to grow fast that you do mark up inference. You have to be either reselling tokens or be tied to the first derivative of tokens. You look at Databricks growing 80% year over year. It's bigger than Salesforce is growing 80% year over year. Well, they're selling a lot of tokens. And so they put some gross margin on or some excess margin on it. And so I think there the question is like, okay, if we're going to charge a customer 30% more for their Anthropic over what they can get through AWS or anybody else, what are we packaging to demand that 30% or 50% margin on top? And that I think is a very interesting strategic question. Like, does a startup say, we will not increase your inference spend and we will use a harness to dynamically manage it? So you're spending the same amount of money, but you're getting more intelligence per dollar. That's a very reasonable proposition. Or are we selling you governance, where every token that goes through our system is secured and audited? And so we're asking you to pay 30% for that. I think that's a crux of a long-term strategic question for the pricing models of the next generation software.
Can I make one more point?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Tomasz and I are just going to share terms today. Look, the one thing that I'd also encourage founders to think about is when I think about data defensibility going forward, which is one of the key questions we always just ask in the staff. They're like, why is this defensible? The way I framed in my own mind is that you should have some eye towards some ability to train your own customary model, or your own specific model that's trained on data that is very specific to something that only you can get access to. And that model should inform some loop that Aditya talks about in the tweet that he did a couple of weekends ago, where he talks about the human capital loop and the token loop. And so what is that loop that you're going to be able to build for your own company, and what are the data that you need to be capturing today to eventually train a model that's going to be your defensibility against the large frontier labs? And I think about it, I call it intelligence sovereignty, right? Like what kind of sovereign thing is going to protect you when, today the models are going from like 2 to 3 trillion tokens in terms of parameters. In terms of parameters, to like they're getting close to 10 trillion parameters. As they just continue to ingest all the data and the knowledge in the world, you have to have something unique to be able to train a model. I really fundamentally believe that.
Okay, can I ask you a question? So what if we just assume there's no defensibility? There was none in SaaS. I mean, let's be honest.
I totally agree with that.
There was no defensibility. Like a database with a web UI. Come on. Like, if you assume that there's no defensibility, then I think the thing that matters for startups is focus, and velocity. Yeah, I mean, so I was at Google like in 2005, and I remember like at Google, every month we would launch a new product. Google Travel, Google Wallet, Google Insurance. I mean, has anybody ever heard of Google Base? No. Google Reader, like Inbox. What was our social network in 2008? That Wave. Like nobody had ever heard of these products, right? And so, but every time we would launch, it would make big waves. And the reality is like less than 1% of the company was focused on that. Less than 1%. And if we look at the total number of FDEs, the hottest job in the market, what does that tell you? It means we need a lot of education, because if you're applying AI to back office automation for distributors, how many people inside of Anthropic, inside of a 5,000 person company, know that space? Maybe one. And so like, I guess my contention is like, there doesn't need to be defensibility. There just needs to be focus. Like you need to care about that customer more than anybody else. And if you do that, you will find a way to serve them and you will make a big business. And the software markets are 10 times larger than they were last time. And so VCs will be happy and you'll be really happy. I know that's like a very reductionist view, but I'm starting to believe this. I'm starting to come around that it really is just focus.
I mean, it's no surprise. I think that's a good way to put it, and I'm going to steal that next panel I'm on. But if you think about it, what the companies we don't name right now that are like, crazy breakout successes, the Anthropics, the Ramp, Cognition, I don't know, they're like crazy fast at shipping product, and they have good, I hate the word taste, but like product market fit sensibility. They can tell what the customers are going to want to use. I don't know what that's called, but to the Google, I mean, Google is just so big, they could produce so much stuff, and like, Gmail landed, like enough things landed. I think the companies on the frontier now are good at that.
So does that just mean speed is the only differentiator? Is that what we're basically saying?
I would actually argue that brand building has become more important than ever, and as a result, you should be investing in, like, in addition to speed, of course, but investing in good product marketers or demand gen folks. And I'll give you some examples from our portfolio, right? So we were early investors in companies like Glean and Harvey, and today they're definitely in the line of fire versus the labs. But one of the things that's actually helping them a lot is the fact that they had 2 to 3 years to build the brand of the company known for that specific use case or set of use cases, which is resulting actually in buyers truly evaluating, let's say, these companies against the labs head to head. It's not, it's not like the labs are just crushing them. So then the question is, how do you do that? Or I would say it's extremely important to prioritize that as early as possible. Also because, for every category back in the day, you had like 3 companies, right? In SaaS, now you have 14 going after the same idea. So how do you rise above the noise floor? So again, in addition to, you can ship fast, but if no one knows who you are, and don't do it in a cringeworthy way, but if you do it in a tasteful way, that'll be an equally important driver to your success.
Actually, Aditya, so this is my last question, and I'll turn it over to you guys. I wanted to ask you and the rest of our panelists about FDEs. And I know you have some personal experience with this at Palantir. So, FDE is like, either the hottest or the worst title to have. But regardless, it's very prevalent now, especially with AI companies. What do we think about this as a movement? Is this sustainable? It seems to be widely applied in all circumstances. And, I'm not so sure that it's always appropriate.
Yeah, I think I'll first start off by saying, so I was an FDE at Palantir for context. The term FDE is totally abused today. Because what an FDE was at Palantir was not someone who implemented a playbook. That's solutions engineering, in my opinion. Like, you had to take this platform that was pretty imperfect and actually figure out where value was, and then close the gaps between the platform and what that objective was with custom software. So and then feed back your learnings, most importantly, to a product team who could then codify some of those learnings into generalized primitives that would make the platform better. So that's truly what made Palantir special. I think a lot of AI companies today are saying that they need FDEs or have FDEs, but those are truly solutions engineers. Now, to your question, I would say what we're seeing today is that, it's in the enterprise context, you're dealing with messy data, you're dealing with systems that actually don't have, ready-to-made MCP servers or connectors. And so that is where, having someone on the ground who is then able to figure out what's the data that I need or the company needs to make the product truly valuable for the use case, and then go and actually build those on the fly. I think that is where value is. And I think, said differently, you're going to need people to close the last 10% for your product. And I think that's also where defensibility can arise. Now, again, maybe we enter a world in 2 years where the models can just one-shot everything, but I'm not as certain about that. And so if that's true, having these like customer-centric people who close the gap and do it in a way where they can be flexible, they can actually figure out where the value is versus just executing on a ready-made playbook, I think that's important.
Yeah, I think maybe just to build on that, I think it's like how much of your FDE motion, resembles just kind of implementation versus R&D. Right? Like, I think the solutions engineering piece of it is when you are going and you are just simply, implementing something for the customer. But when you look at, the folks that are doing FDE for, OpenAI, for instance, a big piece of what they're doing is actually going and collecting learnings on how the model is performing in certain circumstances, what the data gaps are, and bringing that back to their research team too. And I think that, there are a lot of companies that are doing FDE well right now that kind of resemble that, where it's actually a core part of the R&D motion, because really the question is, what can you take back to bake into your model or a core platform that extends beyond that customer?
So I never would have been hired as an FDE anywhere. So I'm just going to put that disclaimer out there. But having said that, I'm glad Aditya framed the answer the way he did, because I think it's one of the most abused terms right now, possibly out there. It's a marketing piece for investors and for recruiting conversations to hire people that otherwise probably wouldn't want to do solutions engineering or whatever. And I think the question for me is always like, how is it baked? How does your engineering process reflect that? And I think Palantir, I'm not going to try to opine on how real it was there, but they really core believed it, even in the face of a lot of doubt early on that, oh, these are just consultants on the edge. Like, that was the firm belief of that company, and almost to a brand around it. And so I think, could others have that too? Of course, yeah. And it's a great engineering practice. It has the possibility to be a great engineering practice, but you have to believe in that engineering practice, not just market it's not a tag you put on so your business looks a little more palatable.
Maybe the last thing I'd say is we are starting to see some companies that are building solutions where, I mean, what FDEs do a lot is try and provide the models as much context that's contextually relevant to the enterprise as possible, right? And so there are companies that are starting to automate some of that. And so I think as soon as we get to a point where the models have enough context to do actual useful work, I do hope the bastardization of FDE goes down, and we can get back to, systems and software and the agents automating a lot of the work with the context that's given to them, hopefully in an automated fashion.
Let's open it up to questions. I'm going to throw this cube at you. Don't be scared. Please try to direct your question to a specific panelist if possible, and try your best not to pitch a startup. All right.
Okay, so same as we founders, we need to learn how to like, products in the last 20 years to like renew our skill sets, be obsessed about that. I'm actually curious, guy, how do you adapt as investors into that way? Because like, what are the every mistakes that cost you millions of hundreds of millions of dollars that now you look at introspect and be like, oh my gosh, I wasn't fool on the way I accessed the opportunity or where the market was heading to, and how do you actually change that to this day?
I can go quickly. I mean, it's interesting. I was talking to one of my founders the other day who's particularly AI native, and he, I kind of was asking him who the top kind of token consumer within his company was, and it was the CEO, right? It was him. And I actually, went around and asked a couple of other portfolio founders this, and many of them actually had that same answer. They kind of knew who that person was, and it was one of the founders. And it just kind of struck me that, like, I think a lot of, the world is changing very quickly right now, and the folks who are kind of actually living at the frontier are just like, they're actually living it. They're the people who are, kind of just like leaning in and really using these tools. And so I've kind of just baked that into my own workflows. Like, I think if I'm going to be a great investor and a great leader at SPC, and actually understand what AI can do for our business, the only place to start is to kind of do it myself. So I've just kind of gone headfirst into it and built a bunch of stuff for myself that's created a ton of leverage for me.
I don't know the writ large answer. I can tell you how we've adapted. I came from a firm, Bessemer, where I sort of grew up, so to speak, that was very thematic. And in this age, the half-life of a theme is quick. If you're still talking about the same thing 6 months later, that's a really, really good theme you found. And I'd almost suspect you're sort of too late on it. And so one of the adaptations we've sort of made for this environment, to the extent you're interested in doing thematic investing, which is some portion of how we all approach it, is to refresh that all the time, or to have a even if you sort of think something is still relevant, refresh your primitives around how to evaluate it, because it just changes so quickly. And what you're trying to kind of figure out is when this company when the sort of product market fit window is going to happen for a particular startup, is it relevant to a broad enough set of people that it matters then? And then predicting that, the windows are a lot more narrow.
Let's get another question. Hey, check one, check. Am I audible? Yeah.
Oh, that's
right. Sorry, you also have the pandemic. Hey, I'm Karthik. And just a quick question to all the panelists. Anyone can jump on this. Would you rather have $1 billion today, or would you rather be the lead author on Attention Is All You Need paper back in 2017?
Out of $1 billion today.
Next question.
So this one, I guess, is for Ethan. You mentioned something about recursive self-improving agents. And this seems like kind of on the edge of research right now. A lot of the VCs that I've talked to lately are saying this is ahead of what enterprise needs right now. Is there a product window for that? Or if you're working in deep tech generally, and you think you have something that's maybe ahead of the curve, how do you approach VC in a way that makes sense, I guess?
It's a very good question. I mean, I came in right after we launched chemistry. This is the end of 2024. One of the themes I was most excited about, that I think I was wrong about, was like self-healing software, and that being like there being like a startup for that. I don't know if that exists. Tell me I was right, but I don't think I was right there. And I do think in certain disciplines, though, this idea of AI that can improve itself is like, clearly where we're headed. And we already have kind of, models doing evals for other models. It's like a mini form of that. When do we have sort of like agents that like self actualize and like, kind of figure out their own problem spaces and move into new territories? I don't think we're that far off from that, right? But is that an investable, is that like a startup, or is that a way you build software in every particular category? I don't know. I'd probably lean towards the latter right now versus a lot of the research around like, how do we like take the self-healing concept to the self-proving, recursively self-improving concept and productize that in a way that other companies can use. I haven't seen that yet. Maybe in chips, maybe in kernels or things like that. There's some companies trying, but I think it's a little bit early to say.
The problem is kind of around productizing or just let them make it.
I think the tech is will be a big part of how software is built. I don't know that there's a discrete company that does it. Does that make
There's
sense?
a related topic or discussion about like what will open source look like in the future. And I can name lots of very, very popular skills or repos, libraries that I use every day. They provide tremendous value to me, but I have a very hard time thinking about how to productize and commercialize it. Superpowers is one. Superpowers is like a Claude skill. It's really good for planning. Jesse, the founder, is a great guy, but at the end of the day, it's like a set of best practices. So how do you make that into a product? It's a tough question, I think, from the investor perspective. Next question. Over.
So there's a lot of chatter around AI services firms, and and then is there something that's within the is there something so unique about the firms like P&Z that you just cannot replace them or just fix them using that? Or do you see that changing?
I think it's going to change. Like, why do I think it's going to change? Because I think there are many. I think if you just forget about the big three, just think about all these services firms, a lot of processes that they do that finally we have the reasoning capabilities to understand and automate. And so in some cases, the processes are a bit complex, which is why you need a mix of an FDE or someone similar plus AI. But in some cases, you're going to have like an AI native solution that can completely automate some of their work. And we are seeing startups do this or start to do this, and it's only a matter of time.
Let's maybe sharpen the question. Can someone articulate the argument for an AI native services firm? And to be more precise, I'm thinking about a firm that sells work on an engagement basis. This is not recurring revenue. This is using AI to do what was previously addressed through professional services.
I'm going to be the foil to this question. I'm going to say that Accenture and McKinsey and the other companies are actually going to thrive. And I'll give you a data point. So Accenture is booking $2 billion a quarter in AI spend. And that would put them, I think, at least in the top 10, if not the top 5 generators of AI revenue globally. And fundamentally, the product they sell is just trust. Like if you're a big CIO at a big company, you want to turn to somebody and say, teach me. And that person needs to be credible. And I don't know if automation can help to a certain extent, and it will. But it won't obviate the need for it.
I agree. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say that I don't disagree that they won't do well, but there are certain domains where, for example, you can do well if you're AI native. And just a simple example is take, by the way, there's a lot of workloads in the world that run on mainframes, right? And run on legacy code, and all that migration work and spend has gone to these consulting firms. And, an example of a company that's doing this with just software is Cognition, right? And they're just throwing dev in at these code bases and executing on these migrations more efficiently. And, that's an example of a domain, and we'll see what happens, but that's an example of a domain where actually a lot of that services spend can move to software. So I think both can do well.
Sorry, I'll be quick. But you hit a good question, because it's like I could actually take both sides of it. I think there will always be, so I'd probably come down more on the Tom side, because I think there will always be that need, for folks that want to, they're looking for a brand, they're looking for credibility, they're looking for, I hired this person to do this. We're not yet at a point where like an agent quite bestows that. Maybe we will get there, and I probably would believe we would get there, but would you get there at the edge thinking? Is there going to be a model or an agent that can, like, some new, with whatever Accenture and McKinsey's selling? Fun fact, I worked at McKinsey for a year, but I still don't know what they're selling. But they sell something that like says like, we're giving you the best business thinking on the planet, like so much better than you can get. I think someone would have to train an agent to it goes to the last question, to be like reinventing and relearning itself, or otherwise someone has to put the training data into it about like what's the latest edge thinking possible. So I kind of come back to like, there'll always be a market for that at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think I was just going to chime in. I mean, services is very loosely defined, right? And so I think there's a lot of nuance here, right? I think there are certain services firms that provide a lot of work that is, very much just captured in a pretty like simple workflow that can be automated, and something like code migration might fit into that. But I think to Tomas's point, like fundamentally, people will pay for a brand that has trust behind it and assumes some level of risk too, right? And I think a lot of services firms, the reason you're paying them is because they're assuming some risk on your behalf when you're trusting their brand to kind of get it done. And there's still a lot of value to that. That's a real moat. And AI, I'm sure, will help accelerate some of those businesses. I'm sure McKinsey's, analysts, your slides would get made a lot more quickly nowadays. But at the end of the day, like there's something about assuming the risk there and creating kind of trust with your brand that does matter. And so some of those services firms I don't think are going away. But there might be new AI upstarts that try to take them on.
So last
question. I have a mic too. Thank you for that. If I understood your website correctly, you think apply AI application startups do have room to be winner, even though all the elements are innovating quickly. Aditya mentioned some companies like brand building earlier was important. What else have you seen are important factors or apply AI quickly to be breakout success in terms of go-to-market and product and other factors? Thank you.
I can say this as someone who did a lot of application software investing before, and how things changed for me. I still do believe in defensibility. If I was to take the other argument, Tomasz, right? There's like network effects, there's distribution modes, there's brand modes, there's all kinds of things that you can do to try and protect yourself. The most, if you were to stack rank some of the things that you can do, the hardest one to replicate are the things that are outside of your own control, regulatory moats and things like that. So like when I backed Shift from a Bridge or R1, which is a revenue cycle management company, then that's just really hard to replicate. Someone who's got Shift's experience as a practicing cardiologist and who has intimate knowledge of the EHR, the payer provider workflows and things like that. So I tend to think of verticalized applications that were previously for me actually a dirty word. Like at Excel, if you had to put on a slide a TAM slide, you were already in trouble at Excel. It was like unconstrained markets that were horizontal that we were looking for. But I think in the AI age, we ended up trying to find these founders that would understand some deep vertical better than anybody else. But that vertical, if it has regulatory moats or some other kind of hair around it, even better. So I think, I know you're doing like a broad-based sales enablement. I think that sounds like harder to me to be able to find moments. And so is there some version of what you're doing inside a vertical that helps you provide some defensibility for you?
Awesome. Well, please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists for coming.